Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to episode 41 of Lean Whiskey. I'm Mark Graban. Welcome, everybody. And we also welcome again
Jamie Flinchbaugh. Good to see you, Mark.
Yeah, good to see you. What's new before we get into topics at hand?
Well, we're heading into late August, which means it's back to school time in our house. I've got two in college, one heading into their senior year. She was here very briefly, about 36 hours, I think, between an internship and returning to prepare for freshman orientation, which she helps to coordinate. And my middle son will be moving back soon, and high school starts in a week. So for my youngest, so it's a gear up time.
Yeah. I don't have kids, so I was gallivanting around apparently without having to do any of that. One quick plug in terms of what's new, though. Audiobook version of The Mistakes That Make Us, available now. Audible, Amazon, and Apple Books. Please check it out.
In the recorded voice of Mark Graban.
5 hours of me. I hope that's all right for people. You can pause whatever you like. So one thing that was new for me, I played a lot of tennis growing up. I wasn't great, but I played on the team in high school. I don't watch a lot of tennis anymore, but the thing that surprised me when I realized that I had never been to a professional tennis tournament as a spectator, ever. Mm-hmm. So here in the Cincinnati area this week, concluding, in fact, the men's final, I've got it recording, between number one in the world, Carlos Alcaraz, and number two, Novak Djokovic. I saw, so the Western and Southern Open. So on Friday, I went during the day Friday. I took the day off. I got to see the number one ranked woman in the world playing a match and the number one ranked man in the world. And I didn't know either of their names coming into it. That's how casual a fan I've been. But like, you get that opportunity to watch somebody who is at least at the moment the best in the world at what they do, both of them, like that's a pretty cool opportunity. And there were some good matches. It was a good time.
That's I don't think I've ever been. I'm almost certain I've never been to a pro tennis match. It's been a long time since I even watched it on television. But for me, we are back into, I call it a real soccer season. Although for those that know me, my team Everton lost 4-0 this week and looked bad doing it. So I may have to double up my whiskey to handle the poor performance. It may not be a pleasant experience watching them this season. It wasn't last season either. But.
Yeah. Well, then I had watched the U.S. women's national team. Then I'm that casual of a soccer fan. I didn't watch any more Women's World Cup, but congratulations to Spain on their victory.
A well-earned victory. They did. A lot of teams did well, but and I'd say all four in the semifinals really earned their spots. But I really think Spain earned the cup and looked good doing it. So congratulations to them.
Yeah. So there are changes coming up. With the coach resigned for the U.S.
resigned, which
he was under pressure, right?
I just think it was good riddance. In major tournaments, he only won 4 out of 10 matches, which is pretty poor for the talent he has to work with. So I'm going to say, it's I'm glad he did it himself rather than have to be fired. And the GM for the women's national team stepped down as well. So there's some really good candidates available. Hopefully they take a little time and make a good decision.
So they will have a new experiment with a new coach and a new approach, maybe opportunities for improvement. And that's going to be our first little topic here before we get into the main lean topic around experiments, changes, opportunities for improvement, and how do you evaluate them. So the first experiment, we've got 2 experiments going on simultaneously today. So first off, the name of the podcast is Lean Whiskey. Yep. After the first 40 episodes, even the one time sounds sacrilege guest, we drank gin, right? But we've always done the whiskey first, then the lean. That's just been the way we've always done it, right? That's a dangerous phrase, huh?
Exactly, it is.
But I just had a thought the other day, and I forget what it was prompted by. I was at the Michigan Lean Consortium conference. And I think it was like somebody, like there are, people will come up to me with more passion than the other podcasts I do. I'm like, oh, I love that Lean Whiskey podcast with you and Jamie. And, I've always thought a little bit about, well, people who don't want the whiskey talk. When we do the whiskey talk at the beginning, there's the 30-second skip button. People can jump ahead. We don't always give great guidance of, okay, if you don't want the whiskey talk, just jump to here. But the idea that I had, and Jamie agreed, let's experiment with this, because the name of the podcast is Lean Whiskey. We're going to do the lean talk first and end with the whiskey talk. So if anyone wants to just bail out on that and stop listening, we understand, right?
Yep. Yeah, so it's an experiment, and we unfortunately we don't have really good measures. Our variation, right, signal to noise ratio, our variation of listener feedback, downloads, all that stuff from episode to episode is greater than we could truly evaluate any signal out of that, unless you all tell us, right? So. Yeah, we'll look for some feedback. We'll ask you to share your thoughts. I have already, I forget how it even came up, but had a conversation with one listener who said, "Oh, I love the whiskey talk." So
we're still doing it.
We're still doing it. We'll still get to it.
We're still sipping on whiskey. We're not.
We are. Yeah, we're not saving. I'm not going to sit here with a bottle next to me and wait.
We'll just reveal at the end what it is
we're drinking. So
and what the theme was.
Yeah, and my wife said, I told her what we were doing. She said, "Sounds like New Coke." Her implication being, are you just changing for the sake of change? Which is an equally valid, I'll say, accusation or challenge to us. But
yeah. Well, give us that feedback, though. You can email me, mark@markgraban.com. You can email Jamie at jflinch.com, correct?
That's correct.
Let us know what you think. But yeah, I mean, this is there a problem, right? Is there a need to try something different, and how do we evaluate it? So, we're gonna talk about that a little bit more broadly. But there's a second experiment going on where we have always recorded these through Zoom. Which works fine. It gets the job done. But I'm currently paying for a platform called StreamYard, where I've used that to do some LinkedIn live streaming, and there's some benefits. And we thought we would experiment doing this video through StreamYard. And I haven't even shared this with Jamie yet, so we can come back to the lean whiskey or whiskey lean question. I don't think there was a problem with Zoom, but I think there's an opportunity for improvement. And what StreamYard promises is, they'll get to see you and me on YouTube in glorious 1080p, which again, maybe that's New Coke too.
Maybe, and that's the thing. I mean, when we, I talk about problems being gaps, and at some level, our gap is to perfection, right? So we may never close that gap, but you want every listener experience to be great. You want every episode to be as good as possible. And even though this is something we do as much for us as for listeners, there is always an opportunity to improve. And when people are making product or service decisions around that, of course, you weigh up the need to improve without a true problem in front of you against the required investment to do so, right? And the risk of a failed experiment. So fortunately, our risk is pretty low, and costs us nothing to do these two experiments. So here we are experimenting away.
Right. And look, if anyone doesn't want to see us in crystal clear 1080p, there's a YouTube setting. They could turn down the resolution. I mean, save bandwidth.
Yeah. Well, I think our anybody that's in that category is probably just listening anyway. So
yeah, but then that's the other benefit, or the thing that StreamYard and some similar systems do is It records the audio and video locally. On my computer, it records Jamie on his computer, and then it syncs up. So, like, we haven't been plagued by internet hiccups. But if we did have one, that doesn't affect the recording.
Right.
The quality should be better. But I think it's one of those, again, like, not a problem, but maybe an opportunity for it to be a little better. And it's a zero incremental cost. I don't know how long I'll keep paying for this platform. Maybe I don't need to be paying for it. And we go back to Zoom.
Right.
So when you say the experiment was free, like, kind of.
Well, yeah, I mean, you were already doing it. So the incremental experiment was free, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, as author of most recently, Jamie, the book People Solving Problems, I mean, I'm not able, or I'm not doing a real rigorous problem solving model here. I don't have an A3. I don't have measures. This is kind of more like, let's try something and see. Warning, like, here's a dangerous word, of how it feels, as opposed to being data driven. Like, what are your thoughts on all that? Am I just messing around?
Well, so, while we don't have great metrics for everything we do know what the critical success factors are, right? We do know that, the ability to have dynamic conversations is important, right? So doing it over, say, audio only, very difficult to have a seamless conversation. We know that audio quality and video quality both matter, right? And so we know what the critical success factors are, and we know that, there's pursuit of perfection in the ability of making the critical success factors better, right? Yeah. And so just because we're not losing listeners based on that doesn't mean we have a gap to expected standard, but we have a gap to at least potential standard, future standard. And so, again, it's worth doing the experiment on. And again, from a cost standpoint, unless people hate it, did we make it worse? Was it one episode? Or is everybody going to unsubscribe and give us a 1-star review all of a sudden? Probably not, right? So
yeah, they're not clicking thumbs down on YouTube, probably. If anything, please click thumbs up. Small little trivia on YouTube. Even if someone clicks thumbs down, that helps boost your video because it counts as, quote unquote, engagement.
Engagement, yeah, of course.
So we're not looking for thumbs downs, but yeah, I mean, I think nobody. If anything, I think experiment 1 around leaving the whiskey talk for the end. Maybe that was a bigger factor, where some people who might really enjoy the other parts of our conversation never really tried listening to it because they were turned off by the whiskey talk for whatever reason.
Right. That's a hypothesis, and we'll find out something, right? And at the same time, I think there's plenty of lean podcasts. There's not a lot that combine it with whiskey, and so just like we drink as part of having a relaxed conversation about interesting topics. I think the doorway of talking about the whiskey before we talk about problem solving and improvement and learning and lean stuff might be good for the listener too. So we hope to get enough feedback to make a decision, and then go from there. We'll see.
Yeah, because I could be guilty of, like, with the StreamYard thing. Well, I've got this tool now. I'm looking to use it.
Right.
Which, I mean, it works, but back to that question of, will I keep paying for this for the other, for the LinkedIn Lives, which I could also do through Zoom. So I'm trying to even remember why did I think StreamYard was necessary or better? There was a reason with one of the LinkedIn Lives. I think that Katie Anderson and I did, but better could be voice of the customer determined. It could be data driven. It could be how it feels. But like one other thing I saw recently, I don't know if you've noticed this, Jamie, but with a new book out, okay, I admit to going to Amazon and see, are there any new ratings or new reviews? Amazon's been experimenting. And I think it's in the same category of, like, I don't know if there was a problem or if they're just fiddling with things, but Jamie, you've probably seen, like, they normally show all 5 stars. And if your average review is 4.8, they shade in all 5.
Right.
If you have a 4.2, the 5th star might be partially shaded. In the app, they started showing just a single star, which is jarring because now it looks, wait, 1 star. It says in parentheses like 4.8. It's like, oh, okay. Now they're just showing the average. And then I think this was in the browser where I'm getting these. There were different experiments going on in like the browser version versus the iOS app. On one of them, they were showing the percentage of 5-star reviews. Then they changed the experiment, and then it said percentage of 4 and 5-star reviews. So they're somehow like playing around with, do we not just give the average? Do we give some semblance of the spread? But if you click through, they show you the little bar chart with the distribution, if you really care.
Yeah, it shows that I have not been paying attention to my reviews. I never really have, and that's I don't know if it's good or bad. But no, it's interesting, and it could be that there's a different format for each medium, right? Phone screen is smaller than a browser, and of course, there's also the thing you can't buy a Kindle book on your phone anymore because they don't want to give Apple and Google 30%, which understandable. I hate that, so I still blame Apple and Google, not Amazon for that one. But that's another change they've made. It's inconvenient.
But your book's been out for a year plus.
Actually a year and a half now.
So my book's still pretty new, where the amount of time I spend looking at the sales numbers or the reviews, that trails off. The amount of time I look, hopefully not the sales trailing off.
Well, and I kind of take the attitude of there's not much I can do about it at this point. So the book is the book. I'm not going to change it based on a review, and I'll keep talking about it because I like talking about it. So that's not going to change based on the numbers. So I kind of feel it's like the Red Sox score. Although the Red Sox are doing better than Yankees, so they're fighting for the bottom of the table. I'll still accept that as happy news, but it's not going to change any decisions I make.
No, I bet Amazon is being much more structured, rigorous, data-driven. They're probably doing A/B testing, which we're not doing any of those things here. But it'd be interesting to think, how is Amazon evaluating? Is it just purely how many people click buy based on different ways of showing the ratings?
Yeah, I mean, they are very data-driven when they come to that, but I don't know what their hypothesis is. I do assume they have one because they've been very, very good at that. Just don't know what it is.
Yeah. All right. So we will, I guess, next time reflect on these experiments, and we'll share feedback and thoughts. So we'll figure that out for episode 42. So I'll kick off. Let me kick off the lean topic.
Yeah, go ahead.
Today, again, whiskey talk to come. We a lot of times call this segment "In the News." Jamie and I didn't really find anything in the news, so this is just sort of not in the news lean topic, prompted by I heard something, maybe it was at the Michigan Lean Consortium conference, and I'm not intending to be pointing this at any direction of any individual or criticizing anyone specific, but the phrase, not that I heard, but sort of came to mind, because I've been thinking a lot about psychological safety, reducing fear, kind of related to the mistakes that make us. And there's often a lot of talk within lean circles around, audits and, the word compliance. If it's not used, it's implied. And I think, well, is some of this like fear-driven lean? Like, do these lean things as a worker or a manager, or you're in trouble, right? They're kind of instilling a little fear of, if we catch you not doing these things, you're in trouble. And it made me think, at the MLC, there was a lot of discussion actually of W. Edwards Deming, which is not always the case at a lean conference. Deming said management should eliminate fear. Toyota was influenced heavily by Dr. Deming, and they say that. And, TPS or lean, in my mind, it's supposed to be as helpful to the employees as it is for customers and for the good of the business. So, if we're having to force people to do 5S or force managers to go do Gemba walks, then there could be a number of things going on. And kind of the final thing I'll throw out, and then we'll have a little more back and forth here. But a different Jamie Bonini, who Jamie Flinchbaugh and I both know from MIT circles. Jamie Bonini has been at Toyota a long time. And he said once, I don't think this was in writing anywhere other than when I've cited it, him saying it. And I think it is a very direct quote. If employees are upset by it, it's not really TPS. It's not really lean. So if we're having to force compliance because people aren't happy with these lean methods, I think it should prompt maybe some deeper reflection than just the compliance game.
Yep. Yeah, and I think there's a couple things to keep in mind in evaluating this whole question. One, to put ourselves in those sort of advocating, they probably wouldn't use the term fear-based lean, right?
No, they wouldn't.
How they're selling it, they would probably use terms like accountability driven, and things like that. And so I think that becomes an important, what's the intent behind it, and what's the experience of it. And I think Jamie, the other Jamie, Jamie Bonini's quote.
Jamie too.
He and I were at Chrysler together quite a long time, a decent amount of time. But I think if the employees are upset by it, it can have as much to do with what it is as how it's introduced.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so, there can be a lot of things that we don't naturally just pick up. We don't naturally just love. But if the resistance, if the hatred, if the fear is driven based on what it is, or am I afraid of the Gemba walk, or am I afraid of the consequences of being made to do the Gemba walk, or doing the Gemba walk and doing it wrong, right? And there's a whole bunch of different layers there about where the fear can come in.
Could be any or all of those.
Could be any or all of those, right? So I do think it is important if you're experiencing this, so maybe not from a design standpoint, but if you're experiencing this in your company, I do think you have to break down the problem and look at, is the fear caused more by what it is or by how it's introduced? I think those are two very different problems to solve.
Yeah. And I think, there's the Deming recommendation of substitute leadership, and that takes, I think, different forms. Conversation, right? So if it was, you and me, let's say, you were my employee and you're not doing these lean things, I could get punitive real quickly, or better yet is like, let's have some conversation about this, and try to really kind of figure out, what the barrier is. I think of times like people don't want a standardized shared toolbox that's 5S, and like people like, what, I've always had my own toolbox for decades. Right. I like having my own toolbox. Like there's a sense of loss, right, that goes beyond habit, and it could be that. It could be, like you said, I've run across managers that fear doing things the wrong way. So then, that to me, that comes back to a leadership challenge of how do we make it safe to make mistakes and make sure we're coaching people instead of punishing them. But like, I don't know, did you ever directly deal with the toolbox thing? Like that's hard because like benefit to the company there is not aligned to benefit for the employee.
Right. It was interesting because I was at an automotive plant that was the very first OEM plant to get QS 9000 certified. We had made all our suppliers do it, but none of the OEMs had done it themselves. So I actually I was assigned this task, but get your site audit certified. And what we found is torque wrenches, right, which have to be calibrated. Everybody kept often two in their drawer, one main and one backup. And there were, I think, like there were 3 times as many torque wrenches in the factory as there were actual use cases for them. And it made calibration impossible, so we had to confiscate them all, calibrate them, control them, all sorts of things. But there was a lot of resistance, and some of it was like, well, I had a really nice one and now I got back a crappy one, right? It's why you like to hang on to, that's why loaner programs often don't work. So yeah, I've definitely dealt with not so much the toolbox thing, but versions of it. And to that fair response of, well, I had a good tool, now you gave me a crappy tool, it hurts my hands.
That's a valid concern.
It's a real concern, right? Yeah. And so that's, I think there's a natural skepticism when you're getting made to do something about, well, is this really good for me if you need to make me, right? It's just sort of a first response. If it's so unlikely that I'm going to say yes and do it on its own merits, that you have to make me, then is it actually good for me, or is there a trick? Is there a catch? Is there something that's going to come back to bite me? I think it's a natural question you start to ask yourself.
Right. And there's similar things that go on with operating rooms. If you look at surgeon, I mean, they call these preference cards of, like, from a manufacturing standpoint, would be like, I want my own bill of materials to build the product the way I want to build it. And so the discussion takes a far longer time. But, I think, like, what doesn't work is trying to force the surgeons to change, because they have the power to push back in a way that skilled tradespeople in a factory might not. But, like, when lead surgeons or department chairs, again, they got to lean into that conversation. And, like, to me, again, I think it's like, it's the Demingism of substitute leadership. If you're not going to force people to do it, you've got to lead, you've got to convince, you got to try to figure out how to bring people along, which isn't easy, but it seems like it's much more successful when people take that approach instead of I'll call it the fear-based approach to surgical instrument rationalization.
Yeah. Yeah. And you get, when you sort of start off on the wrong foot, and I think, just like if we're just talking about how it's introduced, the early phase and the sustainability phase can be treated very differently. You have to think about both when you're doing something, but very often, especially when it's new, you get in a fear-based model, you get what I call malicious compliance.
Yeah,
which is where people do it, right, but they don't do it with good intent.
It's the intent's more of just like, they're not trying. Well, when you say not with good intent, sorry to interrupt, but I think of it being as more indifferent. Like, I don't care. I'll check the box.
Yeah, I think there's a range. I think there's a range from, I'll tick the box, which means it probably didn't do what you wanted it to do, to actually, bad intentions that take you in the wrong direction on purpose. Years and years ago, we had a 5Y report. It was required for anything more than 1 minute of downtime.
Yeah. And
I've actually written about this, probably in my book, but I know elsewhere. I always forget what's in the book and what isn't.
Right.
But he would just do a 5 Ys, and he would always conclude with not enough resources. It didn't matter where it started. Could be a broken conveyor, could be a faulty circuit, could be the tire room was down, but it went to not enough resources. He was just toying with the process on purpose. But
he might have legitimately thought that was the root cause, but good luck with that, right?
Yeah, he definitely had a complaint, and it was probably true. It just wasn't it probably wasn't the cause of that particular issue. And around that same time, I think this resulted. This other story was probably more of people just trying to meet the standard, just any way possible. I want to tick the box, but I need to do it in a way that doesn't kill me. so years ago when we were starting the Chrysler operating system journey, we had a consultant. I'm sure it's a very different. I don't even know if the firm's around anymore, honestly. So I don't mind saying this. I'm sure everybody that was part of this decision is retired. But TBM came in behind Shingijutsu and convinced the CEO at the time, Bob Eaton, not the most engaged CEO we've ever seen, that every plant should do 100 Kaizens a year. And I think honestly the intent was, well, you're going to need help with that, and we can help with most of that.
And I'm always a stickler for this, and they meant 100 Kaizen events.
100 Kaizen events, yes, and this was in the whole original teaching model of Shingijutsu of week long facilitated events run by a master. And so most of these sites really didn't have the resources to do that well, but they also knew the CEO said this is the standard. And so it got to the point where any meeting that lasted over lunch was called a Kaizen, just to be able to go, yep, there we go. We had this long, layout meeting. We had this long staffing meeting, whatever it was, call that a Kaizen and meet the 100, because there was no reward for meeting the 100, but there was just punishment for not. So, make sure we don't fall on the wrong side of that number.
Now, back to the points you raised earlier. If we were to lean in and ask, why would people not enthusiastically embrace this? I've never been the biggest Kaizen event runner or advocate. I think it fits in, to a lean methodology just fine. But some organizations make everything a Kaizen event, and I think that's a topic for a different day, maybe. But to think back, well, was the issue the what it was, or the how it was introduced? Did people think the Kaizen events were not going to be helpful? Did they think they didn't really have problems? Did they think we can't perform better? Did they have that fear of doing the event wrong? It could have been, again, any or all of those, right?
Yeah, and I think that, again, you break down a problem and look at the cause, and a big part of it was they wanted to do them well, right? They did believe they worked, but they also saw, especially in that environment, I mean, you had to hold the hand of the UAW every step of the way, or the Canadian auto workers that I often dealt with at Windsor. You had to hold their hand. You had to get them on board. You needed to make sure that you had you knew the boundary conditions and you weren't walking down, off a cliff there. And, there was engineering work that went behind them, and layout work and capital expense occasionally. And, there weren't the resources to do it well 100 times.
There you go. That root cause there, lack of resources. But but who's going to facilitate the events, right? Was it going to be 100 TBM weeks?
Well, and that's probably might have been what they wanted. Unfortunately, they had already been kicked out of many sites, and so they weren't welcome there, which meant you could get some outside resources, but still only so much leadership to go around. But that's the thing is, you get the 100 Kaizen events, at least you think you do, because you insisted on it. But you get malicious compliance. You get, I'll give you your 100, but I'm not going to do it well. Right?
So, I mean, you can count events. There's lots of things that could be counted. Different metrics. What do you think, Jamie, is like the best metric for lean acceptance or lean progress? Yeah,
so it sort of falls right into the vein of this question around forcing it, and that is a metric that you can never measure, and that is the voluntary to involuntary ratio. How much does it just happen because somebody decided it was good for them at that time versus how much was forced? And when I say forced, I could just mean like, hey, we have a standard of every time we ship a bad quality product, we do a A3. Okay, well, that's a system force, right? It's like that's the system requirement. But the amount that you drive between training, facilitation, triggers, the management system, whatever it is, if more than that is going on just because people believe it works, you're in really good shape. And when I say you can't actually measure it, as soon as you started measuring it, it would become almost all forced, and so it's this elusive measure.
Or people would want to count it as voluntary. That was voluntary.
Right.
Jamie, put that down in the
put that down in that category. So, so I think it's an evaluation, ratio essentially. But I think that's how, and so the goal is to get it more driven by the culture, driven by the behaviors, rather than driven by the system. And it's not one or the other. It's just a balance where more of it is towards the culture and behavior is driving it.
Yeah, and I think if you look at a Kaizen culture, and I'm using that word to mean little small improvements, and like the Masaki Amai, Norm Bodak, everybody, everywhere, every day, not just small improvements, but there better be a lot of small improvements. And when you see that really take root and thrive in a culture, that participation is voluntary, right? It's encouraged, it's supported, and people are improving things. Like I think of our examples that Joe Schwartz and I shared from Healthcare Kaizen, improvements that were very self-motivated because it was good for the parents or for the families of child patients, good for the employees, also good for the organization. It was encouraged. They would count them. But there's two things that go wrong, I think, when leaders say, like, oh, well, we have to incentivize. We have to give financial rewards, or we have to set a quota. Like, you really don't. Like when you tap into, especially in healthcare, and I think like, intrinsic motivation exists in other industries. It's more of like getting out of the way and allowing people to do what they want to do. Where I've seen two different problems with the quotas. Like for one, like if people have to do for a year, they're going to start doing trivial Kaizens to just check the box, and now you're doing bureaucratic stuff that has no value. And then this was more surprising, I think, the first time I ran across it. If the goal is for a year and it's November and I've got an idea for a 5th and a 6th and a 7th Kaizen, I'm going to hold those back until January, because I don't know what next year's quota is going to be, and I don't know if I'm going to have enough ideas. And and that's problematic too. So these things it's a bad assumption, I think, that you need financial rewards, and I think quotas can cause as many problems as they're solving.
Yeah, I agree. I think partly there's a desire to go do something, right? And so quotas feel like an easy thing to do. Incentives feel like an easy thing to do, and they're both in those cases a substitute for leadership, right? Coaching, engagement, things like that.
Right.
And it's not that not that incentives themselves are wrong, but incentivizing improvement, I think, gets very, very tricky for all the reasons you stated. When you start to look at, is our count going up or down? You don't necessarily set a goal. I like to think the difference between an indicator and a metric is whether you have a goal or not. And so, hey, is the number going up or down? Well, let's be curious about if it is and why, right?
Yeah.
That's different than setting a quota that says this is what we have to hit. And as for all the reasons you said, you set that quota, you start to get there. I do think quotas can work short term to initiate behavior, right? And what I mean, so let me give you one example of this. So there's a company I was working with years and years ago, and they had a good system. It's a quick side story is their system made me curious about building good data systems for improvement, which eventually led me to find Kinexus. As sort of the origin story for my relationship with Kinexus, at least finding Kinexus. But when what we found in the data was that a lot of people had done 0 improvements in this system, and then a lot of other people had done 2 or more.
Sure.
Almost the only people who had done 1 were just getting started. And so the conclusion, or at least the hypothesis coming out of that, was that once people got to do one, it wasn't so scary, and they were self-motivated to do a second and a third.
Yeah.
And so we did have a quota of everyone doing one, just to get them out of the gate and doing something. And then that was, then take your, then let that take over, and then work on other motivations to move you forward from there. So I think there's, I'll call it micro, but tactical forcing functions that can work in periods of time, but not for the duration and not the primary mechanism.
Yeah, and I think that's a reasonable middle ground of, getting the ball rolling and then letting people choose to participate when they see benefits. But I mean, I think, as much as we want voluntary activity, I mean, I think there is a time and a place where leadership has to set standards, like, that lean isn't this free for all. Everyone gets to do whatever they want. Like when it comes to, let's say, safety glasses, a classic example of manufacturing. If somebody says, well, I don't feel unsafe, I don't think there's danger, I don't think safety glasses would help.
Right.
I mean, there's a time and a place where you have to draw the line. Now, you might try to make all sorts of arguments or give them data information that would help them decide it's now voluntary, in their mind. But I mean, I think, you've got to pick and choose where you're drawing the line, as opposed to always forcing a 5 whys or an 8-3.
Yeah, and I think a big difference there is, someone can be successful at it, right? I think that's a really important distinction, because, putting on your safety glasses, you know how to, right? You can't fail at it. You could just fail to do it. And so I think there are things where, for example, once you've developed a standard, you've proven that we can follow this standard. So therefore, follow it. There's some accountability there, right? And you should be held accountable to follow the standard. You don't just deviate from it because you feel like it. But again, you've all already proven that standard is feasible, functional, etc. And especially if there's a mechanism for someone to draw attention to a failure in the standard, then it's not a matter of motivation. It's a matter of expectation. It's a very different equation to solve.
Yeah. And, sometimes some education goes a little way. I think, you had put in the notes, like, talking about an example around, toothbrushing. And I stumbled across an article recently talking about 2 mistakes people make brushing their teeth. One is they don't wet the toothbrush first. Now, you could force compliance and say, that toothbrush better be wet or you're grounded. Well, then there's reasoning from a dentist of the wet toothbrush allows the toothpaste to foam better. It gets spread more evenly. Like there's an effectiveness reason to wet your toothbrush. And then the second thing, and I've like, oh, okay, this is one I need to learn from. If you use a toothpaste that's really got an intense minty or intense strong flavor, there might be times where you're tempted to maybe like rinse your mouth. You got that cup of water by the sink. And the dentist was like, don't do that, because you want the lingering fluoride coating on your teeth to stay there. You don't want to rinse that away. So the one countermeasure, if you feel the need, like I have, to rinse my mouth, maybe I need a toothpaste that's effective but doesn't leave that sensation of like, oh, I want to rinse my mouth.
Right. Yeah, and I think those are, about finding optimal solutions based on a pre-existing habit, which is actually brushing your teeth, right? But like as parents, you don't try to convince your kid that they should brush their teeth. You just make them, right? Yeah. And then once it's either a habit or it's a valued habit, right? To your point of, well, what is, I value my teeth. I want to take care of them. I consciously take, do the steps. Then you're trying to find the optimal solutions to doing that. And that is, much better, finding improvements on that standard, that base standard, very much a motivation, self-motivation equation. But getting to that base standard of you have to brush your teeth, you know, that's one of those non-optional ones. It's, hey, you know, your toothbrush is dry, you get out of bed, go brush your teeth. You have to brush your teeth. That's just a requirement. I'm not going to try to convince you. I'm not going to try to negotiate. I'm not going to try to motivate you. It's just what's expected.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot, I mean, you know, there's a lot of gray area, you know, as much as I want to paint it as black and white, you know, it should never be forced. It should never be fear-based or whatever more polite term we're using. I mean, I think here's how I would summarize it. There might be times where compliance is necessary, but I don't think a broad general compliance culture is how anyone gets to really be successful, yet alone world-class as an organization. You have to do more than compliance.
Absolutely. I think that's important. And I think there is a trade-off between, you know, early progress and sustainable progress, right? You can absolutely make more immediate progress with accountability and expectations, but you've made people do things to get out of the gate that aren't necessarily the reasons they would continue to do even more of it, right? Yeah. So, you know, what's, you know, are we going to get a lot of people making 50 improvements in a year if we expect them to make 5? Probably not, right? Yeah. So if it's, oh, we expect you to have all made your first one so you know how to do it, and from there, you know, we're going to support you and help you. Will we have as many in our first year? No.
Sure.
Are we more likely to get people doing 50? Absolutely, right? Because they know it's because it works. Right?
Yeah, yeah. And I take no issue with that. But the thing I will climb up on a soapbox on and rant and rave about is, like, especially like the bad Office 5S that I've blogged about, and I've, you know, did that animated video about 5S in the Office gone wrong, which has been seen. Like there's no piece of work I've ever done that's been seen by more people than that silly. I mean, I think it has an important point. Animated video. I think it's had more than 250,000 views, and people talk to me about it all the time. But, you know, there's things, you know, back to the question of, is there any benefit? Is this good, really good for the company, for the customers, for the employees? When companies have rules like you can't hang a sweater on the back of your chair. You can't have family photos at your desk. Like, to me, that's just all. That's all BS. It's not. How's that? It's not 5S. It's BS.
It's not 5S. I still remember a company where their internal lean person was just berated by the company chairman because he's like, I'm not putting tape around my stapler.
Right.
You know, nobody comes in my office and steals my stapler. And no. And he did not deliver the message in a polite way, but I think he was legitimately worried. Are we telling everyone this? Because he didn't think it made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You know, my office is neat and tidy, but there's almost no labels because, you know, no one shares the space with me, right?
It's not a shared workspace.
Not a shared workspace. And so, you know, we have these things that, you know, we have to understand. I've always said accountability, people don't mind accountability if it's fair, meaning it's equally applied across the board, and I'm just going to hold you accountable, but not these people.
Right.
And it's not arbitrary. To your point, it's not about the wrong thing. And, you know, when we start taking 5S and too far or on the wrong things that don't have a material impact, then yeah, people, you're gonna have to make them because they just know it's stupid right from the start.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just it gets people. It gives lean a bad name when things like that are being forced, and it's a shame. But I was thinking of like there's this conundrum, or like, I'm totally with you around individual desk versus shared workspaces. Now, I've seen some lean facilitators in some organizations in their individual office or cubicle that's not shared. They do all the 5 SE things that they would want someone doing, let's say at a nurse's station or shared workspaces. And they'll say, well, I've got to do the thing we're asking others to do. It sets a good example. Like,
Fair play.
Sort of. But I could also see the argument of, like, should we be demonstrating the principle of we all do the same thing, or the principle of we use the right countermeasures for the right situation?
Yeah, I think in that particular case, given that it doesn't cost much, right? Going back to our experiments, what's the cost of the lean champion 5S'ing their office? Not much, right? So I'm okay with that as a, we're all in this together kind of role modeling.
Sure.
But I also think, what you said, are we solving the right problems, right? If their desk is nice and tidy, but their email inbox is an absolute, hot mess,
right?
Then, okay, well, you haven't solved the important problem. I think, so I think you also have to do what you're talking about, which is apply it with sense in a way that people understand why they're doing it.
Yeah. Well, one other quick example. This is more about like material flow than 5S. I'm a huge fan of Kanban. I've set up Kanban systems in manufacturing and healthcare, and Kanban, and the formal Kanban cards and visual management. It's all great. At home, one of my jobs, internal supply chain, is making sure the bathroom is always restocked with toilet paper, not running out, right? And so the pull signal is not when the last square is on the last tube on the holder. My wife and I have a pretty good process here where if the last roll has been put on the holder, the pull signal is not a formal printed laminated Kanban card. The Kanban signal, which is visual, and I know it, and it works for us. There's a paper towel holder with a little lid and cover. That lid cover goes on my sink in the bathroom, and I see it, and I know I don't need to run that instant, right? But by the end of the day, it's my job to restock the toilet paper, right? So I think contextually, A, it works, but B, we're not being overly formal of saying, oh, well, we have to have a Kanban card and we have to put a tape outline around where the toilet paper goes, because we don't.
No, you don't. You have a system, it works. It's still a Kanban, right?
It's not. I'll add. It's not a fear-based system.
It's not a fear-based system, which I have a fear of trying to implement Kanban in my house. So that's a different problem that we won't try to solve tonight. So no, and that becomes important in that case. That's why it works. It's never used as a weapon. It's just a simple way to be on the same page.
Yeah. Well, cool.
Excellent. So don't force it. Don't apply lean with a broad brush. Think about what you're doing. Think about why other people are doing what they're doing, and how do you help them move forward. And you'll make some mistakes, and that's okay too.
Expect to make mistakes.
Yep.
Yeah. I know someone who's written a book about that recently.
That's what I heard. Yeah. I think there's a book.
Yeah. Okay, so we've done, I think, a lot of lean talk. You want to do some whiskey talk? Do you want to tee that up, Jamie?
Let's do some whiskey talk. So this isn't how we got to our theme, but I did mention earlier that Everton might cause me to drink more whiskey, which might mean I need some cheaper whiskey. So our theme is the least expensive. I think I originally proposed cheapest, but cheap implies that it's bad, I think.
Sure.
So least expensive, the lowest price whiskey currently on your shelf. So that,
and I wanted to add in the implied, and I put it in parentheses in the show notes, the least expensive whiskey that you would actually sip.
Yeah.
So I've got some whiskeys I would make cocktails with. But.
Well, okay, and I think that's. So I'll state my exception here is that I bought what I bought
to mix, right? So it's not bad as a sipper.
Okay, I changed the rules on you midstream here.
No, that's. I think it's an important distinction. I think is it something you'd be willing to sip, right? Or is it something you pull off the shelf and go like, yeah, I'm gonna pour this tonight. So mine probably is not. I bought it as a mixer.
Mm-hmm.
I've not minded drinking it throughout this episode. I also wasn't, blown away. It's actually the first time I've had it not as a mixer.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So that's a different experiment.
Different experiment, but that's okay. I wanted to try it. I heard good things about it. I had never had a bottle. And, I kind of bought it because, when I make some of my mixers, which I don't do a lot of, to be honest, the whiskey is not an afterthought, but it doesn't all come through. So you don't want a $50 pour of a, just for have it to fade away to other ingredients.
Yeah.
So that's why I bought it. Also wanted to try it. This was a great excuse to do that. So my choice is Rebel.
Hold it more in the middle of the screen. We changed our video format. Here we go.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. It's a wheated bourbon, and also making it sort of good for certain mixers. It's only 80 proof, which is as low as you can go. For those that don't know, that's the lowest you can go and still call it a whiskey.
Right.
And it drinks light. For those on our on video that probably saw me pull it up to my lips a few times. It's not the darkest in the world. That's okay. It's not.
Sure.
It's not about. I mean, my Glen Grant 18-year-old is softer than this looking. So and not a strong aftertaste. Very easy sipper. If I felt like I was going to sit down and just sip on whiskey for a long period of time, I could get away with this. And again, being 80 proof, you could drink more of it and not feel the effects. So, it's good. This probably will be the last time I pour it, as it not being a mixer.
Okay. Well, and so this is from, and this is a name I've heard a lot of here in Northern Kentucky, Lux Row Distillers. Yeah. And actually, and I should, well, it's not with the theme, but maybe for another time, I do have the Rebel bourbon. That's like the 12-year double barrel age. That's like the high end version of Rebel. And I forget what it costs, but it's really rich. It's really good. And Lux Row makes some other brands like Blood Oath. There's different releases of that. So, and some of those are really pricey, but like a lot of distilleries, they've got the inexpensive stuff and their higher end release.
Yeah, so I'm sure this is the high volume runner.
Yeah.
And most of the other products they make are not mainstream things that most people have heard of. But this will pain me to use this analogy, so I probably shouldn't. But as a former frequent flyer on Delta, when I say frequent, I mean very frequent.
Right.
Their Scotch of choice was Dewar's White Label.
Yeah. Right.
Which I can, if you put it in a cocktail, I can go, that's Dewar's White Label. I know it's Delta Scotch. That's what bad.
It's not great, not terrible.
It's not great. That's definitely true. But their high end stuff is fantastic.
Oh, age statement Dewar's 12 or 18 become really fantastic.
But this is $19 in Pennsylvania state stores. I don't know if that makes it more expensive elsewhere, but $19 for a bottle. I'm not sure if I've bought anything cheaper than that. I probably haven't. I know that there are some cheaper things than that, at least in the last couple of decades. But $19, easy purchase. quite good. You know, in the end, like I said, would I pour this because I want to enjoy my whiskey? Probably not, but it is not bad at any measure. So that's my pour.
Okay. And I think I would say the same for what I had. And there's, I had a couple choices, right? A couple inexpensive ryes out there that I use to make cocktails. Old Overholt rye, which I think has Pennsylvania roots.
Yes, Overholt was out by Pittsburgh. That's its origins. The Frick family, I think, with steel and Pennsylvania Railroad and all of that. It was all of that ties. I'm sometimes bad at my history facts, but all that was tied together. It's not made there anymore, but it's a Western Pennsylvania origin name.
Yeah. So there are a couple of choices, but what I drank here is from the Buffalo Trace distillery. And this is a label that before I reveal it, I only learned about within the past year, being here in Northern Kentucky, the good people at the Cincinnati airport, which is in Kentucky. The Cork and Bottle is the shop in the terminal, and they do a little tasting bar, and you can buy bottles, and it's past security, and it's really slick, and they're really helpful. So people come in all day long asking for, the most famous, most expensive Buffalo Trace product is Pappy Van Winkle. And then you've got,
which isn't really about. I mean, it's made by Buffalo Trace, but wasn't. But we won't go. Oh, we won't
sold by Buffalo Trace anyway. And you've got their antique collection and the Weller releases, and those are really hard to find, and the secondary market prices are outrageous. And then you've got humble little Buffalo Trace, which is typically about $23 a bottle if you can find it retail, which in Texas you cannot. That's starting to change a little bit. But
Pennsylvania either, it's really hard to find.
When we lived in LA, you could find Buffalo Trace at any Ralph's grocery store or CVS, often on sale for like $20.99 with your discount card.
Very unfair.
It's what? I'm sorry?
Very unfair.
Yeah. But so the guys at the airport told me that there is a brand produced by Buffalo Trace, and there are a number of varieties of it. So this is Benchmark whiskey. It's a very Jack Daniels looking shaped bottle, and even kind of the label,
which is a turn off, I will say.
Yeah, it's it's bonded. It's bottle and bond. So they do a couple different releases. They do the lower proof. This is 100 proof, 50% ABV. They've got a barrel proof Benchmark. But basically, like, my understanding is that this is younger Buffalo Trace.
Yeah.
It's the same mash bill, which is like mash bill number 1, 10% rye. Buffalo Trace, even though it doesn't have an age statement, is said to be 7 to 8 years old. And this is 4 years old.
4 years old, yeah. Which it has to be bottled and bond. It has to be 100 proof and 4 years old.
And to be called Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. And, it meets all those requirements. But, I mean, it's only $5 less than Buffalo Trace. But, it's a bottom shelf whiskey. But it was enjoyable. It wouldn't be my go-to. But I think for the price, that's one thing I've enjoyed being here in Kentucky. You go to tastings, and some of these distilleries will bring out their sub $20 bottles, like Heaven Hill Distillery. They can make whiskey that's pretty good and a really great value. So that was my choice today. Benchmark bonded. You can find it definitely for under $20.
Awesome. Yeah, I've heard good things about Benchmark. I've never found the right bottle at the right time to buy, or my cart was already full. But but it'll be on my list to purchase for sure. I'd like to give that a try. I'm not Elijah Craig's often. I mean, I know Elijah Craig's more expensive than Rebel, but that's often been one of my sort of go-tos for mixers. And Rebel is soft. It doesn't really come through, but I'd like to try the Benchmark bonded. I mean, bonded alone, it's 4 years. It's 100 proof. That's part of the joy of the bottled and bond standard.
Yeah. And Elijah Craig is one of those names, and for me also Maker's Mark. Like the base product is fine, but then when you get something with more age on it, you know, it can be or not. I was actually thinking of Knob Creek. A couple of mistakes there, all rolled together. Like the next time you're here, Jamie, or maybe this is a theme for a future episode. Same product with maybe like 2 different age statements. Doing compare and contrast. Like a fun compare would be plain old Elijah Craig and let's say Elijah Craig with an age statement of like, if you can find Elijah Craig 18 or, you know, basic Knob Creek versus Knob Creek 15.
Right.
Fun
experiment. Scotch is easier to do that with.
True.
True. Because, they have age statements for everything pretty much. I mean, some of their blendeds, of course, they don't. But I mean, it's almost been more popular to have more that aren't age statements. But anyway, Scotch is much easier to do age comparisons, and it is fun to do an age comparison because 15 to 18 in the same brand can be quite a bit of difference, and you wouldn't expect it to be as much as it is.
And then there's the question of how much aging becomes too much.
Right. Which we've debated less on the show, more in preparations for shows, as we've both considered excessively aged and even more excessively priced whiskeys. And it really seems at a certain point you're paying for the statement, not for the taste.
Right. It makes a statement. I got to tell you though, but this was a pour of this was gifted to me. Some friends were in town, and friend of that friend, and like it was being very generous. We're at a restaurant that had Michter's 20.
Wow.
20-year Michter's, and he was generous to buy pours of it, and I'd always wanted to try it. But here's the catch: at the Michter's distillery in downtown Louisville, and they have a bar and a tasting room. Do you know what guess the price of a pour of 20 years Michter's at Michter's? $750. There is that little of it. It's a supply and demand. It's more expensive than a pour of Pappy 23 would be at the downtown Louisville hotels. So I'm never paying that much for a pour. We were at a restaurant where it was $150 a pour, which is damn expensive, but like, okay, he was willing to buy and like, great. And it was phenomenal.
Yeah, I've heard great. I've heard great things about it.
Was it objectively 10 times better than a regular Michter's that you'd get for 15? That's very subjective, but I am appreciative that that he was being super generous and he wanted to try it. But we talk about making a statement, though. He had a bottle at home that he had bought, and you can do the math of like how much that bottle probably cost, and he'd never opened it.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes people, I mean this is a gentle criticism, sometimes people want the bragging rights that they've bought this or that they have this, and hey, teach their own. But so he finally got to taste it at this restaurant, which is part of why he was willing to buy it and kind of share. And again,
we didn't have to open it. He said, I've had it. I know it's good.
So then I asked him, are you more likely or less likely to actually open that bottle? And he's like, well, probably less likely. Like he's not looking to sell. He's not trying to buy and sell. I don't know.
It's free, to each their own. It's your money. You do what you want with it.
It's your whiskey. You know?
Your whiskey. You do what you want with it. You want to store it.
You can't take it with you.
Can't take it with you. But to me, cars are meant to be driven. Whiskeys are meant to be drunken.
Oh boy, there we go. How much have you had this episode?
No, I was looking for a good alliteration or something, but it's having a bottle unopened is definitely not my thing. They're there to be opened and enjoyed.
Yeah. Well, very good. So, there's still all kinds of themes we can explore. I don't know if we've done this yet. Maybe next time we can go back in the other direction of like something that's at the more expensive end.
We can certainly do. I think we can both find something unnecessarily expensive on our shelves.
Yes. And I will never own a bottle of Michter's 20. I can guarantee that. That's right. Like, it was really special, you know, to try it. And okay, life goes on.
Yep. I'm with you. I have not tried it, but I still would have to pass on the bottle. I'll enjoy a restaurant pour, but I won't have it at the distillery either.
Yeah. It's a movie of our generation, Ferris Bueller, where he's talking about his friend's dad's, was it a Ferrari in the movie?
Ferrari, yes.
And he says like, oh, you know, if you ever get the chance to drive one, like,
yes.
What he says, like, oh, it's really choice.
Yes, and it is, and it should be driven. There's museum pieces, but leave that to the museums.
Yeah, we'll just roll back the miles. Problem solved. Just put it in reverse.
We'll just refill the bottle add some food coloring, and we'll call it a day. All right. Well, experiment. I don't say concluded, because that we actually have to get feedback to conclude it, but experiment completed.
We planned and did. Now we've got to study and maybe adjust.
We'll find out. So please give us feedback. Let us know if you like the new format. If you watched in video, let us know if you enjoyed that new format. And we'll continue to experiment. No apologies for that. We'll do experiments, I don't want to say continuously, but regularly. And some of them will work and some of them will not.
This could be a new direction or that detour where someday we'll say, remember that one time, Jamie, when we held the whiskey talk to the end?
Well, yeah. Remember that one time when we did pour over coffee?
Remember all the hate mail we got? No, that's probably not likely. But do let us know what you think. Mark at markgraban.com or Jamie at jflinch.com.
Yep. And on anything, honestly, we love to hear from people. I know we see the statistics, but you know, we still like to hear actual people who listen. So any feedback is welcome.
And even if it's just like Jamie said earlier, and we've said a lot, we do the podcast mostly for ourselves, but I do appreciate when people say something or send a note or a little LinkedIn message or something. It's just nice to hear from people who are listening and enjoying what we're trying to do here or what we are doing. So
you've got it. So to our least expensive whiskeys on our shelves, and to all of our listeners, and to experimentation. Cheers.
Cheers.